They always assume that wealthy senior men made their fortune through brilliant investment picks, perfectly timed trades, insider knowledge, or some secret formula only the rich have access to. But after years of observing men who built genuine, lasting wealth into their 60s, 70s, and beyond, I've discovered something that surprises almost everyone. Their wealth was never built on prediction. It was built on temperament. The men who accumulated real, lasting financial security weren't necessarily smarter than everyone else. They weren't luckier. They didn't have access to information the average man didn't have. What they had, quietly, consistently, invisibly, was a set of habits so unremarkable that most people overlook them entirely. So today, we're not going to talk about stocks, funds, or strategies. This channel never will. That's not our purpose here. Instead, we're going to explore something far more valuable and far more permanent. What is the internal discipline that separates men who build lasting wealth from men who simply chase it? Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." This idea sits at the heart of financial wisdom, though few people ever connect it to money. Every wealthy senior man I've come to respect has faced financial setbacks, market crashes, business failures, poor decisions made in youth. What separated them wasn't the absence of obstacles. It was their relationship to those obstacles. They didn't panic. They didn't abandon discipline. They treated adversity as tuition, not tragedy. Seneca adds another layer of wisdom. Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. This single idea dismantles the myth of the lucky investor. What looks like luck to an outside observer is almost always the visible result of invisible discipline. Decades of patience, consistency, and emotional control that no one saw because it wasn't exciting to watch. The habits of wealthy senior men were never flashy. They were foundational. Behavioral finance research consistently shows that investment success has far less to do with intelligence and far more to do with emotional regulation. There's a concept called loss aversion, our tendency to feel the pain of a loss roughly twice as intensely as the pleasure of an equivalent gain. Most people, when faced with market volatility, make decisions driven by fear rather than reason. They sell when they should hold. They panic when they should be patient. Wealthy senior men, through decades of experience, learn to recognize this bias in real time and refuse to let a temporary emotion dictate a permanent decision. There's also present bias, our tendency to overvalue immediate comfort at the expense of long-term benefit. This is why so many men, even brilliant ones, struggle with delayed gratification. The itch to act, to do something, to feel in control during uncertain times, often leads to decisions that undermine decades of careful planning. Fidelity's own retirement research has found that some of the best-performing accounts over multi-decade periods belonged not to the most active investors, but to those who essentially forgot they had an account at all. There is a name for this pattern in psychology, the endowment effect working in reverse. Instead of overvaluing what they hold and refusing to let go, disciplined men detach emotionally from daily fluctuations, treating their long-term plan as separate from their daily mood. This isn't passivity, it's mastery. Habit 1. They practice boring consistency. Here is something that will never make headlines. The wealthiest senior men I've encountered often describe their financial habits as boring. They contributed consistently for decades, through recessions, through market euphoria, through personal uncertainty, without dramatically altering course based on emotion or headlines. This reflects a psychological principle called delayed gratification, the ability to forego immediate reward for long-term benefit. The famous marshmallow experiment in child psychology showed that children who could delay gratification often experienced greater success later in life. What researchers rarely mention is that this same principle doesn't disappear with age. It either strengthens or weakens, based on decades of practice. A wealthy senior man isn't wealthy because he found something exciting. He's wealthy because he found something sustainable, and he stuck with it long after it stopped feeling exciting. Epictetus reminds us, no great thing is created suddenly. This applies as much to a fig tree as it does to a retirement account. Habit 2. They separate identity from net worth. One of the most striking patterns among financially secure senior men is this: their sense of self isn't tethered to their portfolio's daily performance. A market downturn doesn't send them into an identity crisis. A strong quarter doesn't inflate their ego. This reflects self-determination theory, which suggests that lasting well-being comes from autonomy, competence, and connection, not from external validation or fluctuating numbers. Contrast this with men who check their portfolios multiple times a day, whose mood rises and falls with market headlines, who feel a surge of anxiety every time financial news becomes alarming. This isn't wealth. This is bondage disguised as vigilance. A wise senior man understands a Stoic truth here. The market, like the weather, is outside his control. What remains within his control is his behavior, his patience, and his perspective. He isn't afraid of losing money. He refuses to become controlled by it. Habit 3. They avoid the comparison trap. Wealthy senior men rarely discuss their finances publicly, not out of secrecy, but out of wisdom. They've learned that comparing their financial journey to a neighbor's, a sibling's, or a former colleague's is one of the fastest ways to sabotage sound decision-making. Psychologists refer to this as social comparison bias, our tendency to measure our own progress against others, rather than against our own defined goals. A retired man who is financially secure, but constantly compares his portfolio to a wealthier friend, will always feel behind, regardless of how much he's actually accumulated. Meanwhile, a man with far more modest means, who measures his progress against his own past and his own values, often experiences greater peace and clearer judgment. A quiet bank account is often stronger than a loud lifestyle. This is why wealthy senior men rarely feel compelled to discuss their investments at dinner parties, family gatherings, or social media. Their security doesn't need an audience. Habit 4. They understand the difference between price and value. Many senior men who accumulated wealth over decades share a peculiar habit. They think in terms of decades, not days. They understand that short-term price movements are often noise, while long-term value is built through patience, discipline, and the compounding effect of time itself. This reflects prospect theory, a Nobel Prize-winning framework, showing that people often make irrational decisions based on short-term perceived gains or losses, rather than rational, long-term evaluation. A financially wise senior man trains himself to think beyond the immediate emotional pull of headlines. He asks, not, what is happening today, but rather, does this change what matters in 10 years? Marcus Aurelius offers guidance here as well. Confine yourself to the present. Yet in financial matters, wisdom often requires the opposite discipline, confining your emotional reactions to the present, while allowing your strategy to remain anchored in the long view. Habit 5. They give themselves permission to stop optimizing. Here is a habit almost no one talks about. At a certain point, wealthy senior men give themselves permission to stop. They stop chasing the next opportunity. They stop trying to squeeze out every last percentage point of return. They stop comparing their financial strategy to every new trend or headline. This reflects hedonic adaptation, the psychological reality that beyond a certain point, additional wealth accumulation provides diminishing returns in actual happiness or peace. AARP's retirement research consistently shows that senior men who report the highest life satisfaction are not necessarily those with the largest portfolios, but those who feel a sense of enoughness a term researchers use to describe the psychological state of contentment with one's financial position. The richest senior men rarely feel the need to prove they are rich. They've done the work. They've built the foundation. And now, wisely, they allow themselves to enjoy the fruits of decades of discipline rather than perpetually chasing more. Habit 6. They protect their peace before their portfolio. Perhaps the most overlooked habit of wealthy senior men is this. They prioritize peace of mind over maximum returns. This might sound counterintuitive in a culture obsessed with optimization, but it reflects deep wisdom. A man who sacrifices his sleep, his relationships, or his sense of calm in pursuit of slightly higher returns has made a poor trade, regardless of the numbers on paper. Seneca reminds us, it is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor. The wisest senior men protect their peace before they protect their pride. They understand that financial decisions made from anxiety rarely produce good outcomes, while decisions made from calm, grounded confidence tend to compound just as powerfully as the money itself. Habit 7. They think in terms of legacy, not just accumulation. Finally, wealthy senior men shift, at some point, from asking, "How much can I accumulate?" to asking, "What will this mean for those I leave behind?" This shift often coincides with what Maslow described as movement toward self-actualization, the stage where a person's focus expands beyond personal achievement toward meaning, contribution, and legacy. Money, at this stage, is no longer simply a tool for personal security. It becomes an extension of values, a way of teaching patience to grandchildren, generosity to children, and wisdom to future generations. Money is a tool, freedom is the goal, and ultimately, freedom well used becomes legacy. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "He who has the greatest riches is not he who has much, but he who wants for nothing." This is the quiet secret behind every wealthy senior man's habits. They didn't build wealth by chasing more. They built it by mastering themselves. Patience over panic, consistency over excitement, contentment over comparison, calm over chaos. These are not thrilling habits. They will never trend on social media or headline a financial magazine. But they are, without exception, the invisible architecture behind every lasting fortune I have ever witnessed. Growing older is not about discovering some secret financial formula that eluded you in your younger years. It's about recognizing that the habits, which build lasting wealth, were never about intelligence, timing, or luck. They were about temperament, about becoming the kind of man whose peace doesn't depend on market conditions, whose identity doesn't rise and fall with a portfolio's performance, and whose decisions are guided by patience rather than fear. As Seneca once wrote, "He who is brave is free." Perhaps that is the truest hidden investment habit of all, the freedom that comes not from chasing more, but from finally trusting that you have built enough, wisely enough, to last. If this video gave you a moment of clarity or calm, consider liking it, subscribing, and sharing it with another senior man who values patience over prediction. Seek wisdom, protect your peace, leave a legacy.